Welcome, folks, to this website for this module and lesson. I've really been off the website and haven't done much in the last few months. I had a condition where I was just out of commission here for a while. And I've decided to come back and try to impart something that mainly might address the situation that new hires encounter in coming to training to an airline, and specifically on the 737. Now, with that, I want to introduce you in this session here to just some of the circumstances and conditions that I'll try to address, give you a little bit of an introduction into some of the things that I would cover in a heck of a lot more detail as we go on. Most of these sessions I will try to confine to at most 15 minutes. But they'd be the kinds of things that you could go ahead and have a little bit of time, even during training, to use where some specific information and exercises would be appropriate. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. And what I'd like to do is to, again, reiterate that the objective of what I'm going to do here is to provide some elements that involve going through training, and some things that I believe that over the years of my experience will lead to better pattern of success. Everybody's individual. This is a unique condition that you encounter personally, but it's also in conjunction with others that are involved in training as also. So some of the examples that I want to kind of concentrate on. What I'd like to do is to emphasize priority areas to emphasize and master as you start training and as you go through training. I'll talk a little bit about some pre-training preparation even before you enter training. The one thing that is going to really be a big factor that I want to enter into these modules is the human factors that you'll encounter, both you and, of course, there's other people that are involved in this whole endeavor. That would be someone else that you're going through training with, and also the instructor. There's some key elements here. Human factors is something that if you anticipate and know some of these circumstances, it's going to be easier to deal with. I want to be able to provide that to you. I want to help you develop situational awareness. Situational awareness is something that is critical and important. It's never emphasized enough. I don't know that it's brought up in training enough prior to going to the airlines. It's just something that most people either seem to have an intuitive nature for, maybe had a little bit of introduction to it, but in most cases, situational awareness is not something that is recognized as a significant and important part of being a pilot and an airline pilot. And when it comes to situational awareness, as I note here, you have a big picture of situational awareness that's always there, but then you have unique and specific conditions that you're currently operating under that have some aspects of operations, of thinking ahead, and things of that nature. And I want to be able to cover those things. Here's one of the most important things that I really want to get into. Techniques in operating under a number of conditions. It's important to recognize the distinction between techniques and procedure. And one of the things that is absolutely necessary in flying is to develop your own techniques that wind up being more effective. But more importantly, most of you are going to learn techniques from observing someone else or someone else talking about things. And some of these techniques are very important under certain operational conditions. Not everything can be covered by procedure. There are ways and methods to handle some situations, some of them to be aware of uniquely in given conditions. And just as an example here, what I point out here is that one of the things that's most challenging is a transition from a low instrument approach to visual conditions and landing. It's really pretty interesting to see some of the things that happen there that either have to do with not having appropriate personal conditions that allow yourself to be in a optimum position to be able to make that transition, and we'll talk about those things. Another thing that is really an important area of talking about techniques, which I will cover, and that is when you have an engine failure on takeoff at V1 and beyond, but especially when it's in low visibility conditions. There's some pretty interesting situations that occur when that happens in low visibility conditions, and that's something that you're going to have to do in training. It's part of everybody's certification process. Want to be able to talk about some techniques and methods when you're operating the flight director system, especially scans. It's critical, and in training that is a weak area because you have so much that you're having to learn and deal with. The scans that are associated with the operation of the auto flight director system is pretty weak. So we're going to cover on that, and I can guarantee you that when you look at some of the modules that I'll have for you, that's going to be a much stronger area of your knowledge as you go through training and as you complete training. Another thing that's going to be important, which I'll get into here later, in high density environments during approaches and during other kinds of conditions and visual conditions, being able to safely and efficiently get into position at the final approach fix, operating at flexible speeds and from various altitudes is also something that this airplane has great tools for you to be able to do it. But most pilots don't know about it, and I'm going to introduce you to that. Those will be some technique and some informational pieces of information that will be very valuable to you. One of the things I just want to cover, just touch on here too. My background, I have over 55 years being associated with flying and with much of it being training pilots. Almost all of it was as a simulator instructor and as a check airman. I've done LOSA. I've done a number of different things that are involved with pilot observation and understanding the human elements to it, understanding the reality of it, dealing with tiredness, dealing with all the kinds of conditions that you encounter, human factor conditions of who you're flying with and things like that. And those are the kinds of things that I'm going to look to impart to you as you go through training, and some of this will be very useful for when you go out to the line. One of the things I want to cover as you go through training is assumptions. Don't let an instructor or even you permit yourself to assume that you know something. If you have any kind of ambiguity about anything that you're discussing or covering at the time, let your instructor know, admit that you have a foggy knowledge or no knowledge about it, and get some clarification. The other thing that I'm going to touch on too, there's a wide variety of instructors that train. Most of them, everybody has good intentions, but there's some that are very efficient, excellent techniques, and so you need to understand that the instructor contribution to your success is important too, and I'll cover some of those attributes that I think are important and some of those that you can encourage an instructor to help you achieve. Don't hide if you need an explanation or help about something. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. Does an instructor teach the maneuver or assume that you know it? And I'm going to tell you there's an awful lot of that. I've seen that over the years in the human case. I'll give you one example here. Missed approaches during training and out there in the real world, because you don't do it that often. Boy, they can be real goat ropes, and they are. And that's because people don't really understand not only the go-around maneuver, but the process of making the go-around maneuver. Or they know maybe one step, but they don't know everything that's involved with it. We're going to go over those techniques and those details with missed approaches and many other things. Here's another thing that's important as you go through training. This I call it leading. Whether it's you leading your a partner that you're with or someone else leading you. Don't allow that. Hear me, please. Don't allow that to happen because it's taken away from your learning process and or theirs. So be careful about that. Recognize everybody has a different rate of learning, has a different method and pace about being able to make some applications to some things. Unless it compromises safety, let somebody have some latitude to be able to learn and operate at their pace. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here, this is primarily an instructor responsibility to recognize when this has happened, intercept it, and discuss it with you and maybe your partner, so that it can be understood that there needs to be an allowance for a person to learn on their own. Now, another thing that's important here, and I covered a little bit earlier, is there teaching going on? Or is there just this assumption that you can do it just because you're a pilot and you've been hired by the airline? There's an awful lot of that. And it is important that an instructor be teaching, and this should occur early in sim training. But as you go on and you start to learn these things and be able to apply them better on your own, there should be a gradual transition of an instructor not doing any teaching. And the latter part of training should essentially be devoted, can I function on my own? That is an important transition as you go through training. Now here's another thing that I want you to understand going into training is going to be a key factor of how you need to pace yourself or help somebody else understand. A good instructor is going to pick some of these things up immediately and help you with it. But what is your particular flying background and experience? Do you come from a corporate environment? Is that corporate environment a crew operation? Well, chances are a crew operation in a corporate environment is going to be a lot different than a crew operation with the airlines. And in some cases, some people come from a corporate background as a single pilot. If you come from that condition, then there's going to be a steep learning curve here about how to learn to operate as a crew member. Do you come from a general aviation background? If you come from a general aviation background, that again is a unique environment, and it's something that is going to have some challenges transitioning into an airline operation. Now, some of you are going to come from an airline operation, a regional carrier or another airline, and you're going to have some introduction into that type of environment. So you'll have an easier transition in that regard, but when you come from another airline, you're going to have to unlearn certain things and relearn certain things, and that is going to be a challenge. If you come from a regional carrier too, in my experience, that's a positive as you make a transition into a major airline and their philosophy and their techniques of operation. If you come from a military background, that is kind of a unique background of where many people have to recognize a different way of being able to operate. For instance, the military many times comes from a do checklist. In the airlines, it's a challenge response to what you've already done. So there's a number of different things here. We're going to talk about all those different aspects. But if you come from a military background and a crew concept, you probably have a little bit easier transition. But the ones that really have a difficult time is a single pilot experience, because now what you have to do is be a team member and not operating out of your own confidence, your own ability, and your own situational awareness. So you have to make an adjustment, and that sometimes is challenging for some people. Some of the initial priorities when you go into training, cockpit flow patterns and flow patterns in general throughout the entire regime are really important. And that's just something you just have to force yourself to learn. Is essentially rote memory, but there's also steps and coordinated conditions that are associated with some steps within these flow patterns. But you're going to have a pre-power safety flow pattern as you set up the cockpit, then as you apply electric power and the passenger comfort items there. That's going to have flow patterns associated. System checks and setups, that's going to be a big part, and it's going to have a lot of little individual actions that are taken there. And you just need to force yourself to learn these things. It has to be done. It has to be done in a timely manner. And that is going to be probably one of the biggest learning curves, is knowing these flow patterns. FMS, familiar initialization, that's a big part. Some of the cockpit pre-flights that you're going to be involved with, and that takes a great deal of study and learning to be able to do it. Exterior inspections, and then the big thing that I want to cover with this is an area that's just forced head learning. And if possible, prior to training, see if you can get some study material from your respective airline or someone that is with the airline, and just hard study that, okay? Just know these patterns, know these flows, and where you can, know some of the operations within the flows. But if you don't have that, the first few days of any airline training program and operation is the orientation process. Generally takes 2 or 3 days, sometimes maybe even more. So during that time, get to know the sequence order of these steps here. You put that to some good study time in the evening. Situational awareness is going to be a key element of what I'm going to look to do and provide for you. That's a basic aviation principle, but you know what? It isn't really discussed enough as it should be. It's weak. It's a weak skill, especially with new pilots that come into the airline operation. And it's best that you start to learn this early in training. You're going to have to absorb a huge amount of information that is going to be challenging, and it's going to affect situational awareness. It's going to, but just recognize it's a factor, and everybody's going to be a little bit different in how quickly they learn it, and how easily they can apply things, or how it's going to be maybe difficult in some tasks. So allow yourself some flexibility, but start to recognize I need to develop an awareness, just a mental awareness of situational awareness. Now, static conditions involve situational awareness. Now that's pretty easy, and most of the time with aviation that's momentary. But that'd be the cockpit flows and things like that, where you're in a static situation. But then most of what situational awareness applies to is in dynamic situations, or where there's motion. And that is something that requires a deep skill of understanding changing circumstances, anticipating changing circumstances, staying ahead of the aircraft, knowing your operations, where you take off and you make approaches. Those are going to be constantly changing circumstances where it is absolutely required that you stay ahead of the aircraft, not presently where you are. So handling these requirements to operate an airplane take a vast experience of being able to apply a situational awareness to every condition that you encounter. The last thing I want to cover here is the auto flight director operation that involves the autopilot and manual flight for being able to operate the airplane. It is the most demanding learning curve in training, especially if you've had no previous experience. So this is just hard learning. I'm going to have a bit of personal effort. And then you have to, take time to make these applications with the auto flight director system. But it's more than just applying it. It's confirmation of these applications and scanning in an appropriate sequence to see that these things are done and that they're operating according to what your requirements are. The big thing is assuring yourself that you can operate without guidance or assistance from another source. This is what's most important when you, as you go through training, look to be able to be an individual that can operate the aircraft by yourself, but at all times recognizing you're a crew member and some of your actions require working with the crew partner. Other actions don't necessarily require that, but you be the one that is totally responsible for operating your airplane.